The golden chandelier blazed overhead, scattering shards of light across the polished marble floor as if the stars themselves had descended to the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of carefully crafted conversations. Waiters in white gloves glided between clusters of glittering guests, their silver trays heavy with champagne flutes that sparkled in the light. In the center of it all stood Victor Sterling, tall, tailored, and drowning in his own self-importance. Tonight was his night. He had planned this charity gala for months, not out of generosity, but as another opportunity to flaunt his wealth and social standing. He had spared no expense. The most expensive wine, the most exclusive guest list, and a string quartet flown in from Vienna. But Victor had also planned something else, something far less noble. Leaning in close to a circle of equally smug friends, he lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're going to love this," he said, the corner of his mouth curling into a smirk. "I invited my maid. Wait until you see her try to blend in with this crowd." His companions burst into hushed laughter, the kind meant to mock without drawing attention, though their eyes sparkled at the promise of cruelty. To them, she was nothing more than Maria, the quiet woman in faded clothes who dusted their mantles and scrubbed their floors. She never spoke much, never lingered, and never made herself seen more than necessary. Tonight, Victor imagined her shrinking under the weight of judgmental stares, fumbling over her words, and wishing she'd never dared to step into such an opulent space. He pictured himself as the clever puppeteer, pulling strings that would end in her silent humiliation. The music swelled as another round of guests entered, their gowns trailing like waves, their laughter ringing like crystal. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, anticipation tightening in his chest. Any minute now, he thought. And then, the moment came. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened with a slow, deliberate creak. The conversations faded, one by one, like candle flames snuffed out. Even the quartet seemed to hesitate, their bows hanging midair. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Victor's smirk deepened, for now. He was ready to watch the spectacle he had so cruelly orchestrated. But in the instant before the figure stepped fully into the light, a strange ripple moved through the crowd. It wasn't the polite curiosity reserved for new arrivals. It was something else, an energy, an awareness as if the air itself had shifted. And Victor, though he didn't yet understand why, felt the first faint chill of doubt crawl down his spine. She stepped into the room like a vision pulled from a dream, and for a heartbeat, the grand ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Maria, the woman Victor had expected to arrive in worn shoes and shy glances, was unrecognizable. The soft overhead light poured across the midnight blue gown that clung to her frame with an elegance that belonged on the cover of a magazine. The fabric shimmered with each movement, as though the ocean had decided to take human form. Her hair, usually tucked under a scarf, was swept up into a sleek, regal bun that exposed the graceful lines of her neck, and from her ears hung teardrop pearls that caught the light and whispered of understated wealth. Every detail of her transformation seemed deliberate, from the diamond brooch resting just above her heart to the subtle trace of crimson on her lips. She did not pause in the doorway, did not fidget or search for a familiar face. Instead, she moved forward with the confidence of someone who had walked into 1,000 such rooms before. The crowd shifted as she passed, conversations dissolving into murmurs, eyes following her like a slow wave rolling across the shore. A senator, pausing mid-sentence, stepped aside to make room for her. A foreign ambassador's gaze lingered with recognition, and before long, a photographer in a tuxedo slipped between guests to capture her image, his camera clicking with rapid precision. She accepted a crystal flute of champagne from a passing waiter with a soft "thank you" that carried just enough authority to make it seem as though he had been honored by the exchange. Victor's smirk began to falter, though he told himself it was only because she dressed better than expected. A small detail, nothing more. But the truth was harder to swallow. There was no trace of the timid housemaid in her bearing. Every step across the marble floor resonated with the sound of high heels striking purpose. Each click an unspoken declaration that she did not belong to his game, his pity, or his cruelty. And perhaps the most unsettling part was that she had yet to even look at him. Maria's gaze skimmed over the glittering crowd as though she were choosing which of them deserved her attention, and each person she passed straightened in silent hope that they might be the one. In less than 5 minutes, she was the most magnetic figure in the ballroom, her name whispered in curious tones among people who only moments ago had been immersed in their own importance. The air had shifted again, not with shock this time but with intrigue, reverence, and a kind of quiet awe. Somewhere inside Victor, a crack formed, letting in the uncomfortable realization that the woman he had summoned to humiliate was now the one everyone had come to see. Victor forced a laugh as he moved through the crowd, weaving past guests who seemed far more interested in Maria than in him. He told himself he was going to reclaim control of the situation, to remind her, and everyone else, of her place. "Maria," he said when he finally reached her side, lowering his voice as though speaking to a wayward child. "You clean my house. What exactly are you?" But his words withered before they could fully form, for a voice far more commanding than his own cut across the room. "Ah, Lady Maria de la Vega." The gala host himself, a man whose approval Victor had been chasing for years, appeared beside her with arms outstretched and a smile that radiated genuine warmth. "What an honor it is to see you again. Your contributions last year saved hundreds of children. And this," he gestured toward a young woman approaching shyly, "is one of them. She wanted to meet you in person." Gasps rippled through the crowd like the first stirrings of a storm. The murmurs swelled. "Lady Maria? Contributions? Save lives?" And Victor felt each word land like a stone in his stomach. Maria turned to the girl, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze, her face softening in a way that drew the eyes of every onlooker. "You've grown so much," she said warmly, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face before rising again with the kind of grace that no finishing school could teach. Only then did she turn her attention to Victor. The room seemed to lean in, the music dimming to a hum as though the quartet themselves were listening. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she said in a tone that was polite but edged with steel, "I clean your house, because I choose to. Keeps me grounded. It reminds me where I came from, and of the people who work every day without recognition." She let her gaze linger, her eyes calm but unflinching. "You see, my family's wealth is older than this city, but my heart has never left the streets where I learned what it meant to fight for a better life." A flicker of understanding and humiliation passed over Victor's face, though he tried to mask it with a thin smile. But the crowd had already decided where their loyalty lay. The host beamed at Maria as if she were royalty, the young woman clutched her hand like a lifeline, and Victor, for the first time in years, found himself invisible. In the space of a few sentences the roles had shifted. He was no longer the master of the joke, but the object of silent judgment. And Maria, the maid he had intended to shame, had just revealed herself as someone far beyond his reach, a woman who could sweep into any room and leave it transformed, not by her wealth, but by the undeniable power of her presence. Maria did not look away from Victor as the applause began to ripple softly through the room, the kind of applause that started as polite but grew into something more: respect, admiration, even reverence. She lifted her champagne flute, the pale gold liquid catching the light like captured sunlight. Her posture was perfect, her chin high, yet her voice, when she spoke, carried the calm authority of someone who knew she did not need to raise it to command a room. "To kindness," she said, letting the words hang in the air, sharp enough to cut through every pretense in the hall. The clinking of glasses followed, dozens of them, as the guests mirrored her gesture. "Kindness," they echoed, their eyes not on Victor but on her. He shifted uncomfortably, heat blooming in his cheeks, his perfectly rehearsed charm deserting him like a coward in the face of real power. Maria lowered her glass slightly, her gaze never breaking from his. "You thought you could make me small tonight," she continued, her tone still gentle but each syllable carrying the weight of truth. "But there is no shame in honest work. I have cleaned floors, scrubbed kitchens, and polished silver, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember the worth of every task, the dignity in every role. My life has been blessed, Mr. Sterling, but it was not these gowns or jewels that built my strength." She stepped closer, just enough so he could feel the full force of her words. "It was the days no one noticed me. The days people like you thought I was invisible." A murmur of agreement threaded through the crowd, the kind of low hum that told Victor he was no longer in control of the narrative, and never would be again. Maria turned her attention outward then, addressing the entire gathering. "We live in a world that worships status and forgets humanity. But remember this, it is not the titles we hold or the money we spend that define us. It is the way we treat those we think cannot offer us anything in return." The room erupted in applause, not the tentative kind from before, but a roaring wave that rolled over her words and carried them like a banner. Victor stood frozen, trapped in the spotlight of his own making, while Maria smiled, not with triumph, but with the serene certainty of someone who had nothing left to prove. She raised her glass once more, locking eyes with him for the briefest moment. "To those who work in silence," she said softly, "and to the day their voices are heard." And with that she turned away, the train of her gown sweeping across the marble like the closing curtain of a play whose ending had been rewritten before his eyes. In that moment, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. She had arrived as the maid in his joke, but she would leave as the queen of the night. If you were moved by Maria's story, by the way dignity, courage and grace can turn the tables on cruelty, then don't let it end here. There are countless more tales waiting to inspire, shock and captivate you. Subscribe to Tales Flow, where every story carries a heartbeat, every twist leaves you breathless, and every ending reminds you of the power we hold when we rise above. Your next favorite story is only one click away.